Hello, everybody. I'm Sujana Chandrasekhar. I'm an otologist in practice in New York and New Jersey, and I will be your host for this Trilogical Society webinar called Beyond the Otoscope. And this edition of the webinar will be on navigating growth and change for success. I practice in private practice, and our guests are both academic practitioners, whom I'll introduce you to in just a second. As you may know, we have the Trilogical Society Combined Sections meeting coming up in January in Orlando, Florida. It looks to be a fantastic meeting, and it will be held in the happiest place on earth. So I really hope that you will join us there in January. Registration for that meeting will open up at trilogical.org website later this week. I've had some leadership positions nationally at the AAOHNS, at the American Otological Society, and at the Trilogical Society. Our guests have held leadership positions in various areas. So I have the immense pleasure of introducing both of them for this session. Dr. Yuri Agarwal is professor and chair of otolaryngology head and neck surgery at the University of Colorado, which is a position she's held since 2023. Prior to this, she was a resident in otolaryngology and a fellow in neurotology at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, and she stayed on as faculty there for several years. She was rapidly promoted to associate professor and several NIH-K and R01 grants later to full professor at Hopkins. Her leadership positions include service to the board of directors of the American Academy of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery, chair of the National Institutes of Health Sensory Motor Neuroscience Study Section, and she is elected president of the Association for Research in Otolaryngology. She became chair of otolaryngology at Colorado in 2023. Yuri is married to a professor of climate science at Johns Hopkins, and they have two daughters, aged 11 and 6. Yuri's Trilogical Society thesis was on the quality of life impacts of vestibular loss in aging. Our other guest today is Dr. Evan Rosenthal. He is the Baker Professor and Chair of Otolaryngology at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee since 2021. He did his residency at the University of Michigan and a fellowship in head and neck reconstruction at the Oregon Health Sciences University. And then he joined the otolaryngology faculty at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, where he was promoted to the John Odess Professor and Otolaryngology Division Chief in 2011. Evan then worked collaboratively with the Chair of Surgery and the Dean to create the UAB Department of Otolaryngology in 2015. He and his wife were recruited to Stanford University in California that year, where she became chair of surgery and he became the John and Ann Doerr director of the Cancer Center at Stanford University. Like Yuri, Evan has several NIH grants under his belt. In 2021, he became chair of otolaryngology at Vanderbilt. His wife is still chair of general surgery at Stanford. They have two children, aged 24 and 26. Their daughter is applying to graduate school and their son is applying to medical school. Evan's Trilogical Society thesis was on tumor stromal interactions in head and neck cancer. Welcome to the webinar, Yuri and Evan.
Thanks, Sujana.
We have a lot of people on the webinar, which is very exciting. If you have questions or comments that you'd like to share, please put them into the chat or the Q&A. Beth Faubel from the Trilogical Society is monitoring, and we can ask our panelists real-time questions as they come in. So I'm really happy to do this webinar. The focus is really on the whole person that otolaryngologists are. We could spend all this time talking about your research because as surgeon scientists, you both have truly enhanced patient care and outcomes in otology, neurotology, and in head and neck cancer and reconstruction. But the premise of this webinar is again about navigating change and learning how to grow for career success. So the word success is a funny word and it means different things to different people, but we all do know that success is not linear. There are definitely stumbles and hurdles along the way. So Yuri, getting into medical school is really hard. Otolaryngology remains one of the most difficult residencies to get into. And then fellowships are not easy to reach either. Can you talk about a challenge you had and any advice you have for our students and trainees that are watching?
Yeah, thanks, Sujana. Sujana, it's great to be on this webinar. I think I definitely agree that it can be a very hard road getting in and getting the training in otolaryngology. I was at a pretty small medical school, Yale Medical School, and we didn't have, at the time, a very big otolaryngology department. And, when I was applying into otolaryngology, I sort of discovered that I was interested a little bit later in the cycle and didn't get a lot of interviews when applying into otolaryngology residency. So I think, certainly depending on the program, how, whether or not the faculty or the department itself or the division is connected nationally or has an extensive network nationally, or even if you come from a place that doesn't have a home program, I think there are certainly difficulties even in terms of getting into otolaryngology residency. And so I think, for me, it was really, trying to, lean on the people around me in terms of, the faculty that I knew in the department to try to, be able to have them connect me to individuals who are in other departments and to make phone calls on my behalf. I think that was important in a small community like ours. And I think also, leaning on other friends and family and people in the School of Medicine that I was in to try to get support through something that, was challenging. So I think you have to get the people around you. It takes a village sometimes to, get through a lot of difficult, experiences through the journey. And that can happen getting into residency, into fellowship, and certainly during the transition to faculty. I know there were a lot of challenges that I had along the way too, in terms of securing my first faculty position. So I think you gain resilience as well, and you could sort of learn how to deal with some of the setbacks and, find that within yourself to move forward.
I've been struck by the number of students, medical students, who take it upon themselves to attend Triological Society meetings, American Academy of Otolaryngology meetings. I think it's amazing to meet them and sort of make that connection, share our joy of our field with them, and kind of let them, like you said, meet other people, particularly if they're coming from medical schools where they may not have a strong ENT department. Eben, I know that again, we've all been through this, but once you finished your training, you wanted to apply to a head and neck reconstruction fellowship, and your wife is a really high-level general surgeon. So can you talk about any challenges you faced trying to get to the next step?
Yeah, thanks so much, for the Trilogic for doing this. I think this is a really fun opportunity to share this non-linear success problems that we all face. And I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to embarrass myself in front of people and discuss that. When I graduated, during my chief residence year, I applied to fellowships and I kid you not, open skull-based surgery. Okay, thank God I did not match. But when I failed to match, including at the University of Michigan where I had done my residency, my wife, who had finished 2 years before, and I were basically like scrambling to find a fellowship. She wanted to do colorectal. I wanted to do open skull-based surgery. So we just, at that point, we would go anywhere that we could be together for 1 year. At that point, we had one child and one on the way. And so we were just trying to get in. I didn't care what I did at that point. I mean, I would have done otology. Just kidding.
Oh, come on, man.
No,
You would have
but
been lucky to do otology.
but I ended up doing free flap surgery just by chance, you know, but I mean, I liked everything. So it was a matter of at that time prioritizing a 1-year fellowship and then when you are looking for a job at the end of fellowship, that's the hardest time because you have a definitive end period and you both are like, what's going to happen? We have to find a place, there's this crunch. So it was definitely very stressful during that time, but I think we learned a lot about each other and, she wished she had married somebody who was more likely to match, I think, at that point, but.
I mean, I have to say we are otolaryngologists, but we are also people. And I must say, the three of us happen to be in very strong relationships that have withstood some storms. And I strongly encourage people to have that group of people around you who really know you for who you are and who can talk you out of a really tough slump like you must have felt, Evan, at that point. And then look what happens. Like your trajectory went like this, right?
Right. Mark Wax, my mentors at Michigan were amazing. Carol Bradford and Steve Tellian were people who really listened and helped me work through it. So
you've both as faculty and now as chairs been able to interview several years of applicants to otolaryngology. We have a question in the chat that says, what particular advice would you give to somebody who comes from a small a medical school that does not have an otolaryngology program? And I'm going to add, what particular qualities are you really looking for in the people whom you think would be successes as otolaryngology trainees? And I think I'll start with you, Evan.
So I think that's a really hard question because you're often trying to read somebody else's mind as a student walking in, like, what would they want and things like that. I think so it's difficult to answer, but I'd say the universals are that preparation and knowing the patient. If you're doing a research project or talking about a topic that you would have done the research and you would be in a position to ask really not just questions for the sake of questions, but really intriguing questions. And you would know about the patient, you would know about, if you come to talk about fellowship programs or residencies, you would have done the research to know, and the purpose of the conversation is a more nuanced conversation. And I think that really shows what makes a great resident is that willingness to prepare and to dig deep into the kind of questions or the patient, either the data set, the disease process, whatever that is. I'm always really impressed when somebody knows, a lot. They've clearly invested in.
I remember I was interviewing an applicant once who had given a presentation on cholesteatoma, and that person had put that presentation sort of front and center in their application. So I said, oh, great, tell me a bit about cholesteatoma. And this kid literally said to me, oh, it's pretty easy and there's not much to say about it. And I'm like, dude, it's putting my 4th children through college. So yeah, know what you put on your application, I think would be a very strong thing. And really, I think, Evan, your point is right. I mean, you want somebody curious and interested enough to chase that curiosity. How about you, Yuri? And there's also a question, one about the orphan program people and about how to really find a mentor.
Yeah, I mean, I think we, one of our incoming residents comes from a program that, or comes from a medical school that didn't have an ENT program. I think you definitely have to be more resourceful, and work harder and try to leverage connections and, sort of be more intentional about it when you come from a place that doesn't have a home program. I think, for example, coming from Hopkins, our residents were, had the benefit of coming from a very strong program with faculty who are connected nationally. And so, but it's certainly possible to do that. I think you have to, I think doing away rotations is an important thing to do to cultivate mentors in otolaryngology and to have connections. I think, there's some programs that, have opportunities where they interview students that come through, et cetera. So I think, doing some diligence around that and figuring out where would be a good place to rotate. And I think, that's your opportunity to really make an impact. And so, I think as Evan said, really show up, put a great amount of effort, be prepared for cases. You have to kind of really take that opportunity to shine. And it is, I think it's true that it's harder for folks who come from a program that doesn't have a home program or that has a smaller program, but it's certainly doable. In terms of finding mentors, I think a lot of it is, a fit, whether or not, there's some, you make a connection with somebody personally. I think that's, a part of it, certainly. I think it's also whether or not the mentor is, happens to be at a point in their lives that they're available. I think, I've had strong relationships with people who are strong connections and strong mentoring relationships with people who, whether they're starting out in their career and so they're not, taking on they don't have a huge clinical load at that point, or are, are pivoting or have taken a new responsibility. So I think there are different opportunities in the lives of mentors that make them more available for mentoring. So, but I think also, being clear on some of your interests, listen when you hear people talk at meetings, at webinars like this, whether people think like you or have similar values as you do, or, the way they think through decisions or problems resonates with you. I think that's how I've been able to find mentors that I've aligned with, over the years.
I think, and those mentors don't have to be sort of like the direct line to what you may end up doing. So our webinar audience may have noticed that Dr. Rosenthal mentioned Dr. Tellian. Dr. Tellian is, of course, the best kind of otolaryngologist. He's a neurotologist. But he was one of your mentors, right? And I think the opportunity is to find people who will care about you and who will take the time and energy to help you and think about things that could help you. There's another option for people, and I know one of my mentees, Evan, took this opportunity. She spent a year with your department at Vanderbilt doing research, getting to know the field, really making her decision about what she wanted to apply for. And she comes from a program that does not have otolaryngology. So can you talk to the one-year programs or the several-month programs and how they are helping students make those decisions and perhaps get that exposure?
I think that's a great point. I think there has been a big change in terms of doing that year between your third and fourth year, so that you are able to make connections and go to meetings and present papers at the Triologic Society, for example, where you kind of listen to many of the presentations, you get a sense of other residents or medical students presenting, you connect with them. So it is that opportunity to spend a year doing research under a direct kind of supervision. And I think it can be a wonderful year if your mentor works closely with you and is really focused on making sure that you get abstracts submitted, accepted, and is willing to make sure that you go, connects you with people as you move, encourages you to work outside of their mentorship, but work with other good mentors. And so that as you go, you begin to learn a little bit more about the field than being isolated in one area with one mentor. So I think there are good programs, and I think the way to find a good program is one that has a track record of having people with publications and going to meetings, connecting you with the larger department and the community, willing to send you to meetings. And I think that's all really, really important. And it can be a really, really great year if you pick kind of the right program and a good match.
And I will tell you, I think there's a great commitment among all, at least most, but I think all of the otolaryngology departments to make this not financially difficult for people. So I think that if you look around a little bit, you'll see that there are funded opportunities for you to go somewhere so that you can live and you can work and you can really experience all the wonderful breadth that otolaryngology has to offer. We have one last question in this space, and it has to do with international medical graduates. And otolaryngology is very difficult to get into, even for US medical graduates. And I think international graduates face a different kind of hurdle. And I wonder if either of you have an opinion about one way or some ways that somebody who has graduated from another medical school in a different country could try to become an otolaryngologist. And full disclosure, I am here in the United States of America because my mother, an internationally trained pediatrician, got a fellowship in adolescent medicine at Children's of the DC, which is now Children's National Medical Center. And my father, a fully trained otolaryngologist, had to redo his otolaryngology again at NYU. So I kind of walked this particular walk.
Yeah, I think it is, as you observed in your parents, even a more challenging road, certainly than, coming from a program that doesn't have a ENT program. I think, probably the best opportunity comes from doing some research time and establishing a research internship or a position for a year or two to really be able to integrate within a department, to have some opportunities, perhaps clinically as well, to get to know some faculty. And sometimes those opportunities, one can't select where they are, but I think, what would be most helpful, I think, is to cultivate a strong relationship with a few people that could then connect you with others across the country, or at least potentially give you an opportunity for in that specific program, because I think they would know you best and would probably be most comfortable in terms of, taking you on as a resident.
I think that's the way the people that I know have done it. And I think those opportunities are there. You have to really be willing to look for them and work for them. So let's switch from trainees to faculty. We also have a question about mentorship programs for junior faculty. But as chairs, you're responsible for identifying future leaders and promoting your faculty. You might have faculty who tend to self-promote, maybe before they're ready, and others who, despite being ready, don't promote themselves. You're also the mediator between disputes. So, Evan, I'm going to start with you. How do you make promotion criteria transparent? How do you mentor faculty through the process? And how do you have those difficult conversations that unfortunately are part of your responsibility?
That's a great question. I think I would start first with just the general promotion, not necessarily ascending the rank, but a couple of our faculty are amazing at that. Dr. David Haynes, I've learned a lot from him about how to promote faculty, essentially building structures of talking to people. Okay, are you a part of this society? Are you submitting an abstract here? The ANS or the you guys got a lot of really great societies, including the Trilogic. Have you done your Trilogic thesis? Have you done things which are connecting you to the broader otolaryngology community? And if, and all those things do that, submitting abstracts and going to courses. We, for example, just recently got an NIH-funded symposium that is in July for surgeon scientists at junior faculty and fellows, basically, and it's an opportunity to meet like-minded people. You may learn stuff there, but it's a great connection, an opportunity to talk to people. So I think in terms of promotion broadly, I think thinking about how you're integrating with your community, whether it's otology or head and neck or whatever, That's really important. And the second, and the actual rank promotion, Rick Chandra is our director of promotions, and that trying to make it the different tracks very clear and trying not to discriminate, make it like this is the right track and this is the wrong track. And, you know, everybody has their inherent value. And we have some people who have come in from private practice into our academic department, and they are a major asset because they understand things that we do not. And so I think, you know, their promotion is just as important if it's, you know, it's probably on a clinical track, but I mean, getting them engaged in the department operations and structures just as important as your scientists. So yeah, I mean, I think I answered parts of that question, but I'm that was a big question, so.
It was a big question, and that was a great set of answers. I'm just gonna follow up for that, for example, for that opportunity, either as a surgeon scientist or a leadership program or something. Is that protected time that you offer your junior faculty?
So I think that's a really tough question. Yes, if there's a dedicated surgeon scientist track, there is a dedicated time. If it is a academic with an interest, it's more negotiated or it's more complex. But somebody who's expected to get grant funding in a 3 to 4 year window is going to need protected time. So it depends if you divide it out as grant funded versus academic interest, you know. So those are a little different, but.
So that kind of segues into the difficult conversation. So Yuri, I know that you are, you know, new to the culture at your new institution, but you bring with you the strength and the sagacity of having earned this position. So how do you negotiate these difficult conversations that you may have to have in your department?
Yeah, I think it's definitely, you know, challenging as a new person in a totally new department, having had to establish, you know, a number of new relationships with everyone. And so I think, you know, I'm starting my second year. I think I was pretty intentional. I tried to be intentional in my first year about trying to establish some kind of a connection with, you know, everyone in the department, certainly all the physician faculty, to ensure that, you know, I could understand on a personal level sort of who they were. You know, I feel like the questions that I always ask my faculty, which were, you know, asked of me too at Hopkins, were, you know, what's your thing? You know, and this is kind of a different question maybe, but, you know, what if you were to sort of focus and describe, you know, kind of what your contribution is or what your special interest is with, you know, in addition to being a you know, excellent clinically, you know, what is that? And then also, you know, what fills your cup? It's another question that I ask, you know, and ideally those two things are aligned or, you know, kind of refer to the same space. But I think, you know, so I had a lot of conversations around that, you know, what lights people up, what are people passionate about, to try to establish some kind of a connection, understand, you know, what was something that was important to them and how they like to think about things. And so I think, you know, as I've just started, you know, as in this role and have had to, you know, have some difficult conversations, not too many yet at this point. I think that's been helpful in terms of, you know, having that basis for understanding, you know, for the most part, you know, who somebody is and what their interests are. And so I think trying to use that in terms of, you know, starting and, you know, saying maybe not this, but something else, for example, or, you know, if the decision had to be made. So, and I think just being very direct, you know, and very open and honest. I think there's been a few cases where I haven't really done that, where, you know, I've maybe deferred a decision that I needed to make, or, you know, thought that, you know, if I didn't answer directly, things would just kind of sort themselves out. And invariably it doesn't. And it's harder, you know, when I have to say something or say what I should have said, like 3 weeks later. And so I feel like I'm learning that, and I've tried to, you know, just say that if I know this is probably going to be the decision, I'm just going to say it at the outset, just to save, you know, everybody, and to be respectful also. So I think these are ongoing lessons that I'm learning.
And I would say whether you're in private practice or military practice, the VA or in academic practice, I think the only time you talk to your boss or to the practice physician in charge or to your chair should not be when you have a complaint, right? I mean, I think what you're hearing from both Evan and Yuri is they want to know who you are. And once they know who you are, the problem that's affecting you can be managed as a team effort. And I think you need to take the opportunity to get to know each other and to really figure out how your communication styles are. Is that something you'd agree with, Evan?
Oh, yeah, I think the 100% what you and Yuri said and as a chair, you don't want your first conversation to be a difficult one. You know, you want to make sure that you have a better understanding. I completely agree. I honestly think that as a person approaching a chair, I think the recommendation is to understand that that your chair is responsible for you, but also the fairness and across the department. And so recognizing that yes, you are a valuable person, but at the same time, the chair is responsible not just for you, or the practice lead is not responsible just for you, but for the whole group. And so coming in with that mindset to help find a win-win where there's nothing unfair or not transparent, but there's some way to everybody can kind of, make a win-win out of it. And coming in with that mindset is really important, as opposed to, I'm really good, what can you do for me? But really trying to figure out what it is that would make a difference to you. And then your department chair, she can decide how to manage that, but needs to know what you really want, not, what the goal is.
Yeah, and I would also say, I think another question I've, hoping that I'm consistently asking, and that certainly others have told me is, and I've experienced is being really important is, how can I help you? And so I think that's also, I like to try to end a lot of conversations like that, like how, what can I do to help you? And so I think if you can also establish that goodwill, that's what I'm trying to do, like that's my goal here, then I think people will take some decisions that you make that may be favorable or unfavorable, at least with that sense that you're trying to do the best you can for them in the department.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, it's not like nobody outright wins and nobody outright loses when there's a successful negotiation, right? Each of you get quite a bit of what you want, and often you realize that the other stuff that you thought mattered so much doesn't. And I think it's really important to think about, as both of you said, you're the chair of a department, you are answerable to the entire department, you're also answerable to the dean and the institution. So I think, keeping the loyalties to best patient care, best resident education, and the institution, it's a little challenging, but it can be done, and it can actually be very illustrative and illuminative for the rest of us who are not in those positions of power to try to understand why you are speaking the way you are speaking. So I think that's a lesson, a lot of gray hairs colored, of course, but a lot of gray hairs later teach you those things. So, you both have had an enormous amount of research funding. So, Evan, you've had continuous research funding by the NIH since 2004, with K grants and R01 grants and R13 grants, R21 grants, lots of R's and lots of numbers. The work has resulted in 4 INDs, which are investigational new drug applications to the Food and Drug Administration, and almost a dozen investigator-initiated clinical trials. That's really impressive. Yuri, you received your first grants from the NIH as a fellow, and your K-23, first grants as a fellow, and your K-23 from the NIH in your first year as faculty. You have 4 R01 grants, with 1 as part of a multi-PI project. So this is amazing, but it's a lot of work and rather than talk about the research, I want to talk about managing the research. So Evan, you're a surgeon, you're a faculty member, you are a researcher, not to mention the other part of your life at home. So can you give us some secrets about time management and people management?
To be honest, I think I'm not the best at that. I feel like sometimes I feel like I'm not doing well in all of those specific areas. I think I do try to trust, like fundamentally trust people and look at the best in them and always be until proven otherwise, the person is a friend and successful and is going to work and you're working together. And that I think, as we talked about earlier, I mean, the positive approach, I think, brings out the best in people. And I have definitely had some significant lessons. When you take somebody on in the lab, it's a pretty personal thing. You're often recruiting them from someplace. They're coming in for 2 years, and it is a very, can be a very intense relationship, and you want to really do everything you can. I'm frankly very, I try to get excited about the science. Usually that comes very naturally to me, and that's how I got interested, is somebody inspired me. And so I try to, and if I can do that and the people enjoy it, it is enormous amount of fun getting to know people and mentoring people through talking about science and talking about data and what it means and the implications. And that to me is both the fun, what keeps me going is that opportunity to share my excitement and review data and talk about what it means. And I think I've been lucky that I've, had good people in the lab that were very capable and taught me most of the things I know. So
Yes, thank heavens for collaborators, right?
yeah.
So Yuri, how do you know, how do you sense if a project or a collaboration is not going well? And what do you do to right that particular ship?
Yeah, I mean, I think, now it's all about team science. And so I think who you collaborate with is, a critical decision that you need to make, or that you want to make when engaging in research. I think, I've had, some successful collaborations, and I think I could certainly talk about, what that looks like in terms of finding people that you just like to work with. I think I've had that opportunity, that just people that I really enjoy working with. And, when you have different choices about what research to do or how to spend your time, you might as well do it with people that you enjoy. I think I've also experienced a few where, it just has been a more difficult, collaboration for various reasons. Not typically personal, but sometimes it's the time or the logistics or, something like that. And I think, those, my experience have, I've invariably, drifted away from those and started collaborations with other people. And so I think that's also, important to know, when, something isn't likely. And I think when you're, working on a grant or working on a project, you want to see a trajectory, that you're investing some time and it's going to be a platform that's going to lead to, sort of a whole line of work in science. And so I think to invest that time, you want to be thoughtful about, who you're going to be working with, and, who to collaborate with in terms of centers even, or, different types of studies. Like I collaborate with a longitudinal study, for example, the Baltimore Longitudinal Study of Aging. And so some of those collaborations have been more or less successful in terms of other resources like that to collaborate with. And so I think those are very important decisions. And, for me, I think gravitating towards the ones that have been more positive and successful, and, it's part of the decision making. I think just in general, with grant funding, the way that it is, I think just, again, building that community is super important. I think a plug for TRIO, one of the most important meetings for me of the year when I was a junior faculty member, and, up until, even recently, was the Gail Neely luncheon at TRIO, which was during the the combined sections meeting, which was the 1 hour that was, you know, a meeting for clinician scientists. And I thought it was really helpful just to, and I had a good community at Hopkins too, but just to talk to other faculty nationally. It's very hard. There's a lot of failure. And so it's helpful to have people who can normalize it for you and with you. And so I think that was critical to kind of doing it, because for the 4 grants that I got, there was many, many more that I didn't get. And that's, you know, kind of how it works. And I think also, you know, there are ways that you can be opportunistic in terms of the research that you pursue, both in terms of the collaborators that are doing cool things that you want to, you know, insert a piece of your science with. And that was true for me in terms of Alzheimer's disease, that there's a really strong community of researchers doing AD related research at Hopkins. And so sort of tried to find a piece that I could carve out for myself. And also in terms of funding, being opportunistic in terms of, you know, where there's greater public investment in a given time that, you know, leads to greater NIH investment and, you know, different pay lines. And so I think if you can kind of carve your science in some ways to take advantage of those opportunities, I think it is helpful in terms of getting funding from places like the NIH, where otherwise it's very challenging.
I think that that's really very important and beautifully stated. Where do you give your brain, at what time of day, at what place do you give your brain the chance to sit and just reflect and kind of go through this? Because this is really the time that's not carved into our lives, right? We have clinical time, we have surgical time, we have administrative meetings, we have lab time, we have now got to go home and see those wonderful children of ours, right? We got all sorts of time that's spoken for. But that time to be alone with your thoughts and kind of let your thoughts drift and think about what you're actually doing. How do you find that time? And I'll start with Evan and then I'll go to Yuri.
I have to say, for me, it's usually been exercise. You know, I tend to exercise by myself and really enjoy that, and will spend as much time doing that as my body will allow without rejecting that idea. So,
And that's a time for you to sort of work out your body, work out your brain kind of thing. And how about you, Yuri? Your kids are a little younger.
Yeah, I mean, it has felt for a while like it's, you know, job, family, yourself, pick 2 out of 3, you know, that, and, you know, invariably when you have, you know, young children, et cetera, it's like that's not going to be what you don't pick. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's, you know, trying to be intentional about carving time. I, you know, spend time with family, my sisters, you know, visiting my parents. My parents, you know, have helped us out. They live in Colorado right now. And so that's really helpful. And so I think, you know, being very intentional about spending time with my husband. And so I think it's, you know, you have to put that time in and be very intentional about it, or else it can get compressed. But I think, yeah, I've sort of had to actively manage that.
So we have a really very interesting question. One of the reasons I was drawn to the Trilogic Society was the crosstalk that happens between leaders of each subspecialty, and I'm eager to learn from those who have blazed the trail I'm interested in following. How best do you recommend junior faculty members utilize the Trilogical Society to enhance our own practices? This person has applied for fellowship and is formulating a thesis, etc., but is wondering if there is formal mentorship within the society. So I will answer the first one very small part of that question, which is that Dr. Dan Deschler, who is the thesis chair for Trilogic, is super approachable. And at every January meeting, he has a very well attended, very beautifully done thesis information seminar where you can come with your questions, and he really wants to make it an opportunity and not an obstacle. So definitely there is a formal process for thesis writers at the trio. But I think the rest of the question is really interesting. I love the cross-pollination between specialties actually at Trio very much. So what is your advice for this person, Yuri?
Yeah, I mean, I think the trio has definitely been that place for me where I could step out of our wonderful otology, neurotology world and connect with people from outside our subspecialty. I think it really is one of the places where that is really interdisciplinary and focuses on practice, career building, professional development, mentoring, et cetera, that transcends, each of our subspecialties. And so I really enjoy those kinds of topics. And I like that the Trilogic focuses on that. So it's always been, one of my favorite meetings and places to connect with people. It's also the environment is conducive to, connecting with people. I think, for example, in contrast to the Academy, which also serves that function, it's a meeting ground for across all of our subspecialties. I think Trio, just the format of it, I've been able to make a lot of personal connections and develop personal friendships there at the different events at Trio because it has a different pace. So I think for me, what's been helpful is organizations like Trio, and I think each organization has a different set of champions and strong participants and people for whom this is their primary organization. So there's, people for whom Trilogic is their major organization. There are others for whom it's the AAO, for example, the American Academy of Otolaryngology, and participating there. For others, it's the board, the American Board of Otolaryngology, each of our subspecialty societies, ARO, and I feel like I've had the opportunity to participate in all of them and in some way. And I think just through different experiences, I think Sujana got me into the AAO, for example. Different people have connected me to different aspects of the societies and the organizations. And I think that's been helpful for me because I feel like I have a different group of friends and a network that's distinct and in some ways non-overlapping through each of those societies and organizations. And I think that's been helpful, in terms of my leadership journey, that I've been able to, cultivate a broad network of colleagues.
So I have breaking news. That the Trio Society is creating a formal mentorship program that will be rolled out pretty quickly. So keep an eye at the website because you can see that. And definitely, I would strongly urge you to take advantage of these offerings. They are outstanding and you will learn a lot about yourself and you'll meet some very nice people along the way. So Eben, we have a question. I'd love to hear if the panelists engage in any specific leadership training, and if so, which ones? And then I'm going to ask the second half of that question later. So did you do any formal leadership training?
Yes, I've taken a couple courses that were a week and get coaches. I've gotten coaches that have kind of helped me through that. I found the coaching particularly helpful. I did find the short courses also very helpful in terms of understanding how physicians think and how to approach physicians. But it has been I do think that I've been lucky to have a lot of really great mentors. Lloyd Miner, hired me at Stanford, and Rob Jackler. It's funny, they're all otologists actually, now that I think about it. But yeah, I mean,
I like you because you choose the right friends.
I mean, literally, like, and then, watching those people, and to be honest, my wife is probably my best mentor. And so, I've just been really, really lucky to be around people who I think have their own style of leadership and are really good at it. And you're only in the room with them for 10 minutes, but I feel like you learn a lot about how they do things. So that probably has been, the best thing for me. And then at the Stanford Cancer Center, I worked with a lot of MBA hospital administrators, and that was amazingly helpful. I mean, that was a whole new world of kind of how to think and solve problems in a very different way. So that's how I feel like I've been able to develop leadership.
And I think they use a different language, or they use whatever language we speak, but very differently, right? And I think for us to be able to know how to communicate in that cadence is really important. How about you, Yuri? And I will say that women and men lead differently, and women and men are perceived differently in their leadership. So I wonder if you took any courses that you felt really helped you along your journey.
Yeah, and I think I share some of the mentors that you've had, Evan, folks like Lloyd Minor. I think, growing up and coming of age at Hopkins also allowed me to have kind of a front row seat to a lot of people who are just outstanding leaders, and just seeing that in action, I think was really, a big part of the education. And I have, I think Hopkins also was had a strong set of programs at different stages of one's career for junior faculty, mid-career faculty in terms of leadership training, and even, there was an executive leadership program that was developed and that I participated in a couple of years before I left. And all were helpful and, taught me something at different stages of my career at that point. I also did a AAMC women's leadership course that was probably 4 or 5 days, that was sponsored by the AAMC, and that was a great experience, also focused specifically on women's leadership. I think I've consume a lot of leadership books, I think, to help me think through, different things that I might be, working on or thinking about. I think there's, some of the ones that I go back to a lot or that I reference a lot. I'm happy to share or put them in the chat or whatever. But I think, and those have also, there's some that focus specifically on leadership styles and perceptions of women and men, and that I think have been helpful just to draw from experiences in business and, often outside of medicine. I also think that having some institutional experience is helpful in terms of getting a sense of how the School of Medicine operates, in terms of how people outside our otolaryngology, outside surgery, I think I've said this before, that, often people in medicine run our medical schools. And so, learning about how they think, I think is really helpful, how a hospital functions. So I think having some experiences has also been helpful in terms of, understanding and leadership training.
And I will also answer this question. So I was very fortunate to be selected for the AAOHMS American College of Surgeons leadership course, which was a full week, so 2 weekends and a week in between at Brandeis University. And that really talk about learning a different language and how administrators speak and how cost accounting is done. Things that I vaguely had an idea of, but I didn't know. And that also allowed me to engage with a number of colleagues outside of otolaryngology, but who were surgeons and anesthesiologists, whom I still keep in touch with now, right? So these are really, it broadens your view of the world. The Academy offered, so I am going to throw in a non-otologist here, Dr. G. Richard Holt, had a leadership course at the Academy that I was very fortunate to be selected for as well. And again, I think these are, we can lead as managers in the operating room, but to lead as a leader of a program or an institution takes a different set of skills. And you have to be humble enough to understand that you are not inherently gifted with all of those skills, and that you can actually learn from these kind of courses in a way that you can, as you were saying, Yuri and Evan, you learn how to speak the language that other people are speaking who have important effects on you and your department. And I think the American Association of Medical Colleges, as Yuri said, offers some very nice, sort of long weekend and a little bit longer leadership courses that some of them are geared to women and people of color, underrepresented in medicine. And I think those are actually very helpful as we learn how to be firm and yet not come off as, in some way, one person told me, oh, you look like a woman, but you talk like a man. And it was sort of like this weird disconnect. I was like, oh, I look like a woman? Yeah, I was very excited. But, because I'm super direct. But in the operating room, You don't have time to say, oh, your dress is so pretty, your scrubs fit so well, your hat is so nice, can I have a knife? Right? You don't say that. You just say, please give me a knife, right? Or give me a drill, much more importantly. So I think, learning to address your audience correctly and to learning what is negotiation, these are skills that can be learned if you open your mind to it. We only have a couple of minutes left, so I wonder, and I'll start with Evan. Anything, any pearl you'd like to hit us with?
I do think that if you are getting, every paper accepted, if you're getting every grant funded, if you're getting every job you apply for, if you're getting every leadership job you apply for, you're not aiming high enough. You're just short selling yourself. So I honestly think that rejection just means that you are trying harder, and it absolutely works out. I think Yuri said it best, the 4 grants you got does not represent the 50, at least on my side, that ratio, and the collaborations too. Like, you reach out to somebody to try something new or discuss something, and 1 out of 10 times it works, but it only has to work 1 out of 10 times. And so I think the constant failure is not something that people who match in otolaryngology are accustomed to. And you're creating a very different peer group when you match into otolaryngology. And so just accepting failure is just the price of aiming high.
Beautiful, perfectly spoken word. How about you, Yuri?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think it's a nonlinear journey. And, I've gotten to know Sujan over the years. I know Evan and I have connected a lot also around our journeys. And I think that's, part of the fun of it, that, you get to work with great colleagues and, commiserate about, shared stumbles and, learn from each other's experiences and kind of gain strength and share strength. So I think that sort of helped me along, certainly what's not been a linear journey. I think I really appreciated and I'm so grateful for the people that have been on this journey with me.
We have a second to talk about coaching. So do you guys have formal coaches? I know a lot of chairs are offered that. And if you do, can you tell us, very briefly how that has helped and what you would advise others? I'll start with Evan.
I would suggest using a coach that knows the organization. It does help because each organization is kind of different. And when they know the organization, the advice they give you is more likely to fit with the culture that you're in. I think that the weekend courses are run by lots of different places, and some people really like an MBA type thing or executive MBA. I have found that physician leadership courses are very helpful. They talk specifically around having hard conversations and things like that. Those are the things that I think I was most uncomfortable and still am uncomfortable with. And so, I think anything that is physician directed, a coach that is used to working with physicians within the complex academic medical center environment is going to be helpful.
And the leadership courses you're talking about are by the American Association of Medical Colleges, or are they?
Yeah, Harvard has a couple really good ones. There's some Harvard Light ones, that have Harvard faculty, but and usually within your institution, there's leadership organizations. Sometimes there's opportunity for masters in health administration. Those can be very helpful, and those often courses come with a coach. So there are really lots of different organizations, and I think any that are directed at physician leadership are going to help you understand your strengths and weaknesses.
And Yuri, you're new to this chair game and you're killing it. So have you been using a coach?
Yeah, so I used a coach, around the process of being a candidate for a chair position. I think it was a very focal engagement. I thought it was really helpful because it was, something that was, not a very new experience for me. So it was really helpful to work through with somebody who had a lot of experience. And I do have a coach now as part of the position, and I think it is really helpful. I think for me, occasionally as a chair, you have to act in ways and, do things that run counter maybe to how you might behave socially or, what comes naturally. And so I think, you have to have direct, difficult conversations with people that you don't, do typically in other spheres of your life. And so I think it's helpful to have somebody to model that with and, go through that with, as you're doing it.
I want to thank you both. I've had a wonderful time talking to the two of you. I always do, but I really am enjoying this format and really looking forward to the next in this series of webinars. I'm Sujana Chandrasekhar, and I've been talking with Dr. Evan Rosenthal, who is the Baker Professor and Chair of Otolaryngology at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. Dr. Yuri Agarwal is Professor and Chair of Otolaryngology, Head and Neck Surgery at the University of Colorado. I am in private practice at ENT and Allergy Associates in New York City and Parsippany, New Jersey. I want to thank you both so much for sharing and for being so candid about your experiences and your thoughts. I want to thank our viewers for having tuned in and for sharing your questions with us, because I think that made this conversation even better. We all look forward to seeing you in Orlando, Florida, at the Triological Society Combined Sections meeting, which will be held January 23rd to 25th, 2025. Registration is opening later this week, and you can find all that information at www.triological.org. Thank you again so much, and have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Good night.